Okay. We are recording. I want to thank all the awesome students here. I see some mostly familiar faces and some new faces here. And we've got some people still logging on online here. I'll turn off that jingle in just a second so that it doesn't interrupt our guests. This is the, what is it? Are we in the third or the fourth? Third installment of Careers for History Majors. This has been a lot of fun so far. In the first, last week, we heard from, somebody remind me, teachers. Hannah Knight and Alex Ponce. And the week before that, we heard from museums, of course. And a little bit of overlap here with Nathan's work, but also with archives in general. I'm interested to know a little bit more about this. The great thing about these sessions for me is that I'm learning a lot as well. I'm having a lot of fun. I hope you all are too. This is session number 3. We're going to learn about archives from several different approaches. We're going to first hear from Eric Milankovich, who is here, sorry. Eric is here on our campus in the Fowle Library. He's the university archivist in Fowle Library. So I'm really excited to hear from Eric in just a minute. And quickly I'll also introduce joining us online, Nathan Gonzalez, who is the archivist and head of special collections and curator at the Lincoln Shrine at Smiley Library over in Redmond. Some of you are familiar with the Lincoln Shrine over there. So Eric and Nathan, I'm very, very grateful for you both to join us today. Eric is going to lead off with a few remarks about his work, and then we'll turn the floor over to Nathan, and then I think we'll have plenty of time for discussion and questions. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Eric and Nathan.
So I'll just have a few brief remarks to get us started here today, and I'm sure Nathan does as well, and then we'll just kind of open it up to any questions you all might have. So I guess just to start, everyone knows what an archives is, right? We've all heard of archives? Okay, so I'm not going to cover that. But let's talk a little bit about what archivists do, right? So archivists are essentially, we're the ones that set the professional standards for how archives should work. So a day in the life of an archivist, like what does that look like? What are you going to be doing on a daily basis? It varies quite a bit. But first and foremost, archivists, we acquire, process, and manage archival collections. And this can include a variety of tasks, from meeting with donors to picking up materials at people's houses that have been donated, foldering and boxing archival materials, and also creating finding aids that describe archival collections at an item, folder, or collection level. So that's really at the heart of archives work. It's acquiring, managing, and kind of processing these archival materials that organizations have, typically integrated into their library. But we help people find archival materials. So we handle in-person requests. We also handle a lot of inquiries via email. We digitize materials and we build digital collections from these materials to increase access to them. Because of course, all things in a special collections and archive don't circulate, right? So you have to come on site to use them. So by digitizing them and getting them out there online, it just makes them more accessible and visible to people. We develop exhibits, we deliver presentations, we direct events. Archivists promote the availability of archival resources and provide instruction on how people can use them. We solicit funding for projects through grant writing. So writing grants is typically part of many archivist positions. As you can imagine, libraries and archives are underfunded typically, so we need to find external funds to get our projects completed. We also conduct research. So a lot of us conduct research on archives, also related fields like history, for presentations, workshops, publications. We supervise staff, students, and interns who work in the archives and manage the projects that they work on. And of course, in addition to all of this, there's always that other duties as assigned, right? Like most jobs have that in there. So for example, my job here is classified as a library faculty position. So I'm also assigned like typical librarian duties like collection development, library instruction, and then general reference for the Fowle Library. So I pick up on those things as part of my responsibilities as well. The one thing I wish someone would have told me about archives before going in is how much time I'll spend in attics and storage units going through old dusty boxes. That is a lot of what we do here in acquiring collections. The collections never or rarely come to us like arranged in pristine condition. A lot of work goes into preparing those materials for research use later. Education. So what are the educational requirements for archivists? A graduate degree is required for most professional level jobs in the field. However, you can still work in archives as a technician or a specialist just with a bachelor's degree. And it helps to have a bachelor's in history, but it really could be any field. And essentially, you would assist the archivist in all types of work from assisting patrons to fulfilling research requests to even some basic archival processing in that kind of support role, right? But if you do want to go on to become a professional archivist, you're most likely going to have one of two degrees, either the Master in Library and Information Science, so the MLIS, or you're going to have an advanced history degree. And just depending on the type of organization, so of course, I work in a library, so the MLIS is preferenced in my line of work. If I were to work for, let's say, the National Archives, an advanced history degree is probably preferenced in that organization. There's also a new degree that is available out there. It's called a Master of Archives and Record Administration, or a MARA degree that some universities are offering. I know San Jose State up north offers it. However, it's not formally accredited by anyone. So like an MLIS is accredited by the American Library Association. The MARA degree is not at this point, since it's relatively new. So the MLIS or a history degree are still kind of the go-to degrees, advanced degrees for archivists. Workplace. So where do we work? Where do archivists work, right? They work in a variety of settings, but there's three most common. Universities. So typically in academic libraries, special collections, university archives, you're going to find archivists. For the government, so the National Archives, state parks, they all have archivists as well. And also in corporations. So think like Disney, Coca-Cola, Levi's. They all have archival programs that preserve their company history. So corporate archivists will work in that environment. And in addition to that, you'll find scattering of archivists of all sorts of things. Museums, community and indigenous archives, historical societies, hospitals, and even religious communities have archivists typically. So there's a lot of different places where you'll find archivists working. There are several professional organizations available to archivists that help kind of guide our profession's work. It supports networking opportunities for us, and just generally provides a space for us to come together in support of our common interest of history and preserving our cultural heritage. So there's the Society of American Archivists, which is our national professional organization. We also have the American Library Association, which is geared towards librarians, but since the work of archivists and librarians intersects quite a bit, they also support a lot of archivists in a professional capacity. And then there's also these regionals. So there's the Mid-Atlantic, Midwest, and Northwest US. They all have kind of these regional organizations that support people living in those areas. In California, we're such a big state, we actually have our own. So we've got the Society of California Archivists, or SCA, which is a professional organization just for archivists that are working in California. So in my time here, just with a few key takeaways for you, as you're pondering entering the field or looking into entering the field. As a student, definitely think about completing an internship at an archival repository, doing a poster presentation at an archives conference, or even volunteering at a local historical society, because doing things like this will help you gain experience in the field and will also make you a more competitive candidate for an archivist position if you're going to begin applying. A lot of people, will get the history degree or the library degree, but they won't have necessarily any like practical experience, and employers are looking for that practical experience. So any way you can get that leading up to becoming an archivist, I would definitely say go for that. One thing to keep in mind, there are a limited number of jobs in the field, right? You're not going to see a whole lot of archivist jobs out there, and it can be very difficult to kind of get that first job, right? The more flexible you are, the more opportunities that you're going to have. And this may mean that you need to relocate, right? Because you're going to find a higher concentration of archivists in like the major metropolitan areas. So like Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, Boston. There's relatively few archivist opportunities out here in the Inland Empire. We have a huge population, but we don't have a lot of archivists, right? So it definitely might require you moving out of state. I know a lot of people who have had to move out of state for their first professional job. Some of them get back to California, some of them never make it back to California. I've also seen people who have gotten their degree and are unwilling to leave the area, and they've never been able to get a professional position in the area. So it's just something to keep in mind as you enter the profession, just being like flexible and open to possibly moving, because again, these jobs aren't that easy to come by, and they can be competitive to get. I highly recommend that you get involved in a professional organization during the early stages of your career. They're a great way to network, to meet people, so definitely take advantage of that. I know I've been very involved with the Society of California Archivists. A mentor of mine kind of got me involved. I started serving on committee. I served on the board. I was the president of the Society of California Archivists in 2020. So I kind of just like worked my way up over the course of about 12 years of being involved with the organization. And it's just been instrumental. I've made connections with colleagues all throughout the state. We've written publications together. We've presented together. I've been able to lean on all of them for professional guidance. So I really can't stress enough like how valuable that kind of connection can be. And it can also be really helpful in getting you a job, right? Because if you know people and they know you, jobs open, they reach out. So it's an opportunity too to kind of grow your career by meeting a bunch of different people. You should also plan on presenting at conferences, conducting research and writing publications. That's a requirement for a lot of the jobs out there. In my position here, it's a faculty line position, so I have to publish, I have to present, I have to be engaged with the community. It's part of how I'll move through the tenure process. Not all archivists have to do that. So for example, at the UC system, University of California, archivists don't have to go through the tenure process, but at Cal State, they do have to go through the tenure process. So it just depends on the institution and how they kind of set things up. And it can also help you, doing those things can also help you move up in the field, right? And move you into higher level positions if you publish a lot or you present a lot. And just to wrap things up, lastly, just prepare to complete your work with limited resources, right? Archives are typically underfunded, they're understaffed, and it really does pose challenges for your work over time. So you're gonna need to be flexible, and at times you're also gonna be very creative with how you're able to complete projects. And that's really where that kind of that grant writing comes in as a skill, because if the funding's not there and a project needs to get done, you have to find the funding, and that's one of the ways to do it. So just kind of keep in mind, you're not going to be working with an overabundance of resources, and just learning how to kind of work in that environment would really be helpful once you get into archives. So that's pretty much what I got. I guess now we can turn it over to.
That's great. Thank you, Eric, for kicking it off. All right. And then Nathan, and you want to give some remarks, and then we can have a discussion question.
Sure. Hi, everybody. It's great to be with you. I'm glad to have the opportunity to be here. Eric did such a good job of giving a whole overview of the profession that I'm not going to belabor any of those points. But I think I'll give you a couple of kind of key things that over time I've really learned, and then also just a little bit about my personal history and how I got into all this, because it was not a direct route, right? So the first kind of thing I would say is to try to pay attention and recognize opportunities when they present themselves, because sometimes if you're very focused on a very specific goal, you miss other opportunities that are out there, and sometimes those end up being the best paths. And the other one is to recognize what kinds of transferable skills you might have. So, quick example, I did 4 years of scenery construction when I was an undergraduate in our theater department. And I had no idea then that I would end up using those skills in museum curatorship and in archives, but I can build stuff for exhibits as a result of that. So there's all kinds of different skills that you might have that you don't think about being important in the field or whatever kind of career path that you end up in. But those kinds of things are out there and they really help. So just a little bit of the personal background, because your stories may be similar. I was an undergraduate, and I thought I'd been a history major since I was a freshman. I declared like the first week I entered, right? So I was going to be a history major. I knew I wanted to do that. And I'm probably one of the few people who actually graduated with the major I declared as a freshman. And I always thought I was going to be like a high school history teacher until I was a senior in college. and started taking School of Ed classes because I finished my major. And I very quickly realized I was not going to be a high school history teacher. And so I had to do a quick pivot. I ended up picking up a minor in music instead of taking classes. But then I was in the panic of what the heck am I going to do with my life now? Because all of my life I thought I was going to be a high school history teacher. So I started looking around at graduate programs because the real world scared me. The real world actually still scares me, and had to figure out what was I going to do. So I'm going to punt and go to grad school. And I looked at a couple of different programs, and this was in the mid 90s when there weren't the kinds of programs in archives work, things like that, like there are now. There's a number of really great programs, but there were very few programs in the mid 90s. So I ended up looking at one at UC Riverside that was it was in the history department, and they called it Program in Historic Resources Management, which is not a very sexy sounding title, but it was something that was trying to figure out a practical application for history outside of the academy. And so I thought, okay, well, that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to go to that. I'm going to be a museum curator because I'm going to take the museum curator track. And they had 3 tracks: archives, curatorship, and historic preservation. So I got there for my first quarter, and as it turns out, the museum curatorship track wasn't going to be offered at all during the 2 years I was there. So I had to make another pivot and figure out, okay, now what I'm going to do. And it happens that I started taking archives classes, and it was something that I had never even considered. I was aware sort of the existence of archives because I'd done undergraduate research, and actually ended up publishing my senior thesis, which was cool. But that was my only real entry to the field before that. So then I started having to seriously consider, well, maybe this is something I want to do, and proceeded through the coursework in archives in addition to all of the history department master's level coursework that was required, and did a summer internship in between with the 2 years of that program at an archives in Northern California. Actually, I went back to my undergraduate school to do that, and then came back and finished my degree. And at the same time, I managed to get a part-time job at the public library in Redlands. I wasn't living in Redlands at the time. I was living in Pomona. And then I spent a year in a basement going through all kinds of boxes of things that hadn't been looked at. Some of them, many decades, I think. So I had to do an inventory of all of the things I could come across and locate them. And so it was a real interesting opportunity to do a survey of collections that hadn't been done before. And then graduated the degree, had the part-time job. Eventually a full-time job became available, and I applied for that. And 25 years later, I'm still at Smiley Library. So I was just very fortunate. But that was one of those things where it wasn't my plan to stay in Southern California, but an opportunity presented itself. And I managed to recognize that opportunity, I guess, and it brought me an entire career that I did not anticipate. My plan was to finish the graduate program and move back to the Bay Area and have a career up there. And obviously things went in a completely different direction, and it was all for the better. But if I had been focused on that was the only goal, I would have completely missed out on an opportunity like this. So it's been an interesting evolution. I mean, Eric talked about all the different things that we do as archivists, and depending on the size of an institution where you might work, you might have just a few responsibilities, be very focused on what your tasks are. Or if you're in a smaller institution like I am, you have to do a little bit of a whole lot of things, which has actually been a lot more fun than I think if I were specialized for my personality, if I were specializing in something in a larger institution. It's great to see Connor Farrell on the call or in a Zoom meeting, because he was one of our summer interns at Smiley Library last summer. And so he might actually give you an interesting and different perspective on the same institution than what I could give you. But it's just it's a fascinating, if you like history, then there's no end of rabbit holes to go down, things that you can really see how researchers are going to be able to use or want to use to recognize the kinds of records out there that have lasting historical value, but maybe others don't see it yet. To make sure that those things also get preserved. I mean, we're kind of like Redland's attic. People joke that the Smithsonian or the National Archives is America's attic. There's all kinds of stuff, and we got to figure out what's worth keeping because we can't keep everything. But yeah, getting the material, getting it organized, making it available for researchers, whether that's in person or through virtual media, really important evolution just in the last 20 years. So it's been an interesting journey, and I would highly recommend the fields related to public history to anyone who has a passion for history, for sure. And I'd be happy to share anything about what we do or why we do it or anything in my background too. So that's just a quick nutshell.
Thank you, Nathan. That was great. Thanks to Eric and thanks to Nathan for getting us started. And I just turned the light off because you're on the screen there. It made it a little easier for everybody, but I'll turn it back on. And I'll just open the floor, for Elise, do you want to get started right away? Go ahead, jump in.
Okay, do you guys have any recommendations for where to look for internships? Or for how we would go about, I suppose, being appealing as interns?
I don't know, Eric, do you want to hit that or?
If I say that into the mic. Yeah, I mean, I think, there are places that have formal programs where you would apply to be an intern, right? And you can find a lot of that online. But sometimes it's just literally like going into an archive and saying, hey, do you offer internships? Hey, do you offer volunteer opportunities? Because a lot of times they do, right? So I think, that's one way is just kind of showing up. You can look online. I think as history majors, of course, it's so related to archives that we always like to have history majors in the archives because we know some of them actually might turn into archivists. But yeah, I mean, I think, the National Archives, that's where I did an internship when I was in school, at the National Archives when I was out in Laguna Niguel. Local historical societies, of course, academic, campuses like the Special Collections University Archives, here at UC Riverside, like all of those would be options for you as well. So it's just a matter of just kind of looking online and maybe making some in-person visits.
Yeah, does SCA maintain a kind of clearinghouse list? I don't know. It's been a while since I was looking for that stuff.
Yeah, I don't know that SCA has anything. Of course, like SJSU, if you were to go to the master's program there in library information science, they help you get an internship and they have lists of possible ones, as does UCLA for their program there. But SCA might be you could always just honestly reach out to SCA like president, just email and be like, hey, do you have any recommendations? It's a really small community and everyone's super helpful and they want to see more archivists in the field. So everyone's really willing to help out in any way that they can if you show that initiative and that kind of that energy to be part of the field.
When we share this out, SCA, the Society of California Archivists, will share out some links and some resources for everybody along with those to follow up with. That's great.
Yeah, and we have an internship program at Smiley Library too for the summer that's specifically geared towards undergraduates who are interested in considering a career in public history. And it's a paid internship.
And not to put Connor on the spot again, but he also interned here, right? So he's got experience here at Cal State and also experience interning at Smiley.
Yeah.
So what is the process of acquisitions for archives actually like? Because I've heard a lot about museums and they'll buy big, fancy, expensive artifacts at auctions. For an archive where presumably you're dealing with smaller, maybe less grandiose documents, what is the process of acquisition like?
Nathan, do you want to take that? Because you have a little bit of both probably.
Yeah, I mean, even archives have the opportunity to spend large sums of money on materials if you have the funds. So one of the things that we collect are things related to Abraham Lincoln and the American Civil War. And so turns out that, Lincoln's not writing a lot anymore. And so the stuff that he has written, it becomes very expensive because it's very collectible. So we just acquired, thanks to a group of donors, a Lincoln manuscript from 1864, and I won't get into the details of what it was, but it cost us about 50 grand. So I mean, so yes, there are acquisitions through purchase in the field of archives as well. But also we rely in a public library setting, we rely a lot on donors who are interested in preserving either their, collections related to organizations that are local or companies that maybe have been important in the history of a community, and they're looking for places to save all of this material, especially like local organizations. I mean, all of these volunteer-run organizations, this stuff tends to go like from one person to another, and for some of these, those boards sort of skew a little older, and every once in a while, someone will like have a bunch of the stuff. They've been the keeper, and it's under a bed, and then they die, and their kids were like, "What the hell's all this?" And they chuck it. So we try to maintain some level of awareness out there of, if you want your organization's materials to be preserved into the future because your organization is important to a community, then give them to us, and then we'll serve as stewards for that. So it really is the range for us, at least, for in terms of acquisitions, from big purchase on one end to relying on everyday community-minded donors.
So I'll just add to that. So before coming to Cal State, I was the archivist at UC Riverside for about 18 years. And I came here in 2020, right at the start of the pandemic. In both institutions, we've had literally no money for acquisitions, right? So there's no money allocated to purchase archives. So we heavily rely on donations. And what I did here coming in, they pretty much just would collect anything anyone wanted to give them. They would just take it in and accept it. So when I got here, it was like an attic of just like random things. So what I did is I drafted a collection development policy saying these are the areas that we're going to focus in on, that would really support our students, our faculty, and research here at our campus. And then I go into the community and try to solicit those type of collections to come into the archives here. So one of our main focus, of course, is Inland Empire history of San Bernardino, Riverside County, with the focus on historically underrepresented communities. That's kind of what our focus is here. So we have the Bridges That Carried Us Over project, which is documenting Black history in the IE. And we've taken in a few collections from community members that document that history. So yeah, it's a lot of just kind of keeping the pulse on what's out there and matching it to what you want to collect in your archive that can support, in our case, our university. And
I had a question. This one's for Nathan. If you don't mind sharing, you had mentioned that you originally wanted to be a high school history teacher and then had the realization you didn't. What was that?
You mean what caused the realization?
Yeah.
I had enrolled in a couple of different classes in our school of education at my undergraduate school, so that I could work on a teaching credential while I was there. And I think it was really more kind of how the coursework was being presented, and I don't know, I made it about 3 weeks and then suddenly was like, this is not going to happen. And then need to figure out how to pivot from there. But it was just a kind of gut feeling about knowing how my personality works with different things, and that probably wasn't going to be a good fit in the end.
Thanks for sharing.
I have a weird question. I have an oddball piece of historical something. I have a piece of Adolf Hitler stationery that was given to a friend of mine by a person that captured it from Berchtesgaden as a member of the 101st Corps that I want to get rid of. And I've not figured out any way to get it to somebody that would treat it historically, not destroy it, but also not sell it to a Nazi. And I wanted to know if you have any suggestions.
I wonder if the Holocaust Museum would be interested in something like that.
Same Museum of Tolerance.
Museum of Tolerance. And there's also the World War II Museum out in New Orleans that have collections related to that era. So I think all three of those would be good options to reach out if they're
It's not
interested.
all that special a piece. I mean, I suspect there's lots and lots of stationery floating around, but.
You don't want it to land in the hands of somebody who's gonna like it for the wrong reason.
I don't want it to wind up in the hands of someone who's gonna like it because they think it's, yeah, the cat's pajamas.
And like years later, someone goes to your house and then they find that and they start making assumptions about who you are. Because I've had that happen to
Well,
my
I
best
don't
friend.
make assumptions about who I am.
That happened to my friend.
I've got, they can make a lot of assumptions. I've been a lot of things.
don't want that.
Maybe more if I live long enough.
That's actually interesting. When my grandfather served in Europe, and brought back some souvenirs, whatever, and I don't know what to do with those either. I don't want to sell them because of the exact same reasons that you mentioned, but I also don't know quite what to do. So they're still sitting in a box.
Yeah, interestingly enough, here we have Nazi signs and pins and buttons in our collection. I don't know how they got here. I don't know why we have them. And again, I'm letting them sit in the box because I don't know what to do with them. We don't want to throw them away. We don't necessarily want to push them out there. It's some things in archives, you just kind of, you hold on to them and it is what it is.
It's sort of related. Are there items that like you have refused or have, like you've said no to donors, like we don't want to deal with that, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think if things fall out of scope of what you're trying to collect, I mean, we've definitely had that conversation. People are like, oh, this is great material, but unfortunately, that's just not what we collect. And then usually we refer them to places that we know might collect in that area. So yeah, definitely, there comes a time where, yeah, you just can't accept certain things, or you may not be able to, like it could be a great collection, but if you're so under-resourced and you can't manage and preserve that collection appropriately, there's times that you should pass on it as well and kind of direct them toward an institution or repository that can, you know, make sure that this is preserved long-term. So yeah, it definitely happens.
I'm guessing taxidermy animals maybe. Something or an animal.
So yeah, and a good example of that, so at UC Riverside, one of their main collections is the J. Lloyd Eaton collection of science fiction and fantasy, which also includes fanzines and furry fandom. So there was a donor who wanted to donate furry costumes to the archive, and that was something, we're not a museum, we don't have the appropriate storage, we don't know how to like preserve these things, and we had to decline that, even though it did align with our collecting interest. It was just something we knew we couldn't take on to preserve and make sure those things, you know, weren't ruined over time. So yeah, sometimes you just gotta make hard calls, and that was one of them.
That's worse than taxidermy animals.
When he said that, it reminded me of the furry costume.
Sometimes people have things too that they don't want to throw out themselves, but they want to put that off on someone else to make that decision, and we don't want to be that necessarily. Yeah. So the exact same thing. If it's not realistic, appropriate for our collections based on our collecting policy, we don't just take it because they're nice people and they want to do something with it. It really needs to fit within our collections, and we have to have the ability to take care of it.
You'd be surprised how many people have collected National Geographics over the years and donate copies of it to the library. And as you can imagine, that it's everywhere. You can find National Geographic everywhere, and they can't bring themselves to throw it away because they've been collecting it for so long. But then again, we don't want to take that on because we know how accessible they are everywhere else, right? So sometimes it's a difficult conversation of saying like, yeah, we really don't want that, and it's really not that rare, but they're so tied to it, right? So sometimes you have to be a little delicate with donors.
I'm wondering about we read a little bit last week and this week about collections and about the idea of the archivist potentially being seen as a kind of gatekeeper. And that gets into this question of preserving heritage and the question of whose heritage, and you talked about these sort of active roles of going out to collect some things, and then also the passive role of taking whatever people bring. Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of because we talked a little bit about becoming an archivist, but what about your encounters with people who are going into your collections maybe saying, give me everything, I wanna look at everything, and then you have to make it sort of determination? Or is there a calculus, is there a determination where you say, okay, here are the things along those lines? Because I've been up at the Hoover Archives, and you have to sit there in the room and somebody brings you like a dessert cart full of, things for you to look at. What goes into that sort of encounter that you have with scholars who come into your collections and say, I'd like to look at this? Is there sort of a range of encounters? And do you have any, it's a broad sort of question, but that interaction.
Want to start off, Nathan?
Sure. I mean, so our job is to figure out exactly what a researcher is really trying to figure out, and then match them with the resources that we have. So it's called the reference interview. It's something that reference librarians do, archivists do, like that. It's really more about getting them the right resources. Sometimes researchers don't know exactly what it is they're looking for. So over the course of conversation, or maybe several different research visits, and they can kind of focus better on what it is they want, and then we figure out what are the resources we have that will help them answer those questions. Every once in a while, we'll get a researcher. We have some collections that are restricted, and Cal State may as well. Like things related to Native American cultures, which are not open to every researcher. And so sometimes we'll get a researcher who's coming in who may actually be aware of the existence of those things and want to see it. And we'll have to say, I'm sorry, the way that the collection is maintained is X, Y, and Z are the requirements in order to be able to access these materials. Because they're sensitive in nature or whatever it is. And sometimes researchers are not really excited by being told no. But it's that those, fortunately for us, are pretty few and far between. Really, it's more about trying to figure out what it is they're really looking for and make sure that everything that we have that's related to them, to their research topic, we can find for them.
Our archives here at Cal State are fairly new. So special collections didn't open until 2008. And I'm the first archivist to be hired on campus, and that was in 2020. So a lot of the materials we have were unprocessed. So researchers don't even know what we have. And that's been part of my job, building an archival program so that we start to process collections and people start to understand what we have. And that will hopefully generate research use. At UCR, we kind of had a mix. We had those researchers who would reach out to us specifically for specific collections that they wanted to work on, right? And then, yeah, we would kind of find, the collection they wanted. They would tell us a little bit about the materials they were interested in, and then we'd get them, a collection of boxes, wheel it out to them, let them use it. Other people walk in and they say, I'm interested in Riverside history. And then we'd have to kind of piece together, okay, what collections do we have that supports Riverside history that we can bring out to this researcher to help them fulfill that project that they're working on. So it's kind of a little bit of a mix with the target researchers and then the reference interview for people who have like a broader area of interest with archives.
I went up to the East Asian collection at Berkeley, it's now almost 20 years ago, and they had an unprocessed, essentially a bin of what were Chinese Cultural Revolution, 1960s handwritten manuscripts, and they had not processed them, and they let us as doctoral candidates come in and look at the materials, look through the materials. Are you ever able to say, we have an unprocessed collection of this, and put that on the website so that one of my students or somebody might come along and say, hey, can I get my paws on that? And, and with supervision, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the institution. So some institutions allow access to unprocessed collections, some institutions don't. Here, what we do is if we fully process the collection, we'll have the finding aid online that denotes that. And if we've only partially processed it, we'll also say, okay, this collection is partially processed or remains unprocessed. So it clearly states that, but we still provide access to researchers. It just sometimes takes us a little extra time to kind of get things in order for them to kind of prep it. Because a lot of times, yeah, it could be just like a whole box of just things thrown in, and we want to clean it up a little bit so we have some level of control while the researcher's going through it. But yeah, it depends. And I don't know, Nathan at Smiley, if you guys allow access to unprocessed.
Yeah, it's same for us.
Yeah.
I have an experience with that actually. In my research, I write about reproductive justice, and Dr. Virginia Espino on Cal State LA, she has our own collection about the Madrigal versus Killigan case in the late 1970s. And for the longest time ever, I didn't have access to them, and I emailed them like, why is this not, and like not. Because like it was, Cal State LA students had access to it, but not to the even though I'm a Cal State student as well, I'm San Bernardino student. So I had to wait till they went to their own to the archive themselves because they had a backlog. And thankfully, they just went to the primary sources and now I have access to them. So in the situation, not even like only their own students can look at it. No one from out of school can look at it until they have gone to it completely.
Yeah, and the policies do, that does sound kind of strange to me, like why can a Cal State LA student look at it, but not a Cal State San Bernardino? But I mean, each institution has their own policies with how they deal with it. It's definitely not something that you're gonna see the same across the board. Like, for example, with like the Huntington Library, like a researcher has to apply to research with them. You can't just walk in and be like, I wanna see the Olivia Butler or Octavia Butler papers, right? You have to apply to use it. And they then deny researchers access to their collections.
I think probably because like the Virginia Espino is an instructor at Cal State LA, so she probably asked her permission or something to look at it before it was fully gone through, but it was really interesting to see that.
I'm really interested in this because we've got two archivists here. And so, yes, I want to talk about becoming an archivist, and you guys are all getting ready to do your research. So you have these two guys who are gonna help you navigate the research process from in the best way possible. Because again, there can be these tricky twists and turns in the encounter. But it's really good that the researcher and the archivist and I love this, Nathan, what you said about researchers coming in not knowing what they don't know, and that's a really great thing to
It's like etiquette too, like I had to like go through like a little orientation before I got there. My advisor's like, you have to handle these documents in a certain way. If I didn't ask, I would have gone and would have been like, it's like, but there's a way that to read the documents, not to like jump through them, and that was really interesting to also find out too.
Yeah.
I don't want to keep our guests too much more, but we have about 15 minutes. I know I'd love to keep mixing it up as a from the researcher talking to an archivist and how to do it, but Randy, jump in.
I'm just drawn back to the idea that there's Third Reich stuff in the archive here. How do I get to see that?
Yeah, well, fourth floor file library, we're open Monday through Friday, 8 AM to 4 PM. And then, yeah, it's in our unprocessed materials, but I know where it is. Like I could pull some of it out for
I
you.
will be there next Wednesday. Tomorrow.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think you brought up a good point too about kind of like what to expect when you get to an
Yeah.
archive, right? Like, cause people don't know what to expect. And a lot of times there are a lot of rules and regulations of what you can and can't do and how you're handling materials. And I think that's kind of been the historical like knock against special collections and archives. It's like, in a sense, we're trying to protect and safeguard these materials, but then we're introducing barriers to using these materials. And the whole reason we have it is so we can make them accessible. So there is kind of like this back and forth between not, being too stringent, but then also making sure we're protecting these materials. So yeah, typically when you come in, they'll kind of go over, okay, here's how you have to handle things, and it's one folder at a time. And if you're dealing with photographs, you gotta wear the gloves so that you're not getting your fingerprint on them. So yeah, that is something to expect if you're doing research in an archive, that it's a little bit more just strict.
Yeah.
Structured.
Anybody who's
And that's
joining us on Zoom, please jump in. Whoa, sorry, was somebody gonna?
Well, I was gonna say that's one of the great arguments for digitization is the increased access that allows for, so you don't have to risk preserving something and try to balance that against access. So if we take something and digitize it, then every researcher can have access. You don't have to come in and then something that may be super light sensitive or whatever, where we have to balance preservation concerns with. Of course, you can't digitize everything, but.
I had a couple good experiences with archivists and librarians, especially in the last 4 years, responding to requests to sort of spearfish digitization, where he said, can this be digitized or that be digitized? And that seems to be, anyway, just a comment that I found that to be really, really encouraging. And again, just a comment for students, is that if an archivist or a librarian has time, they can, do this kind of thing. Have you done that where somebody's on the other side of the planet or the country and they said, I see you have this document, I can't get in to see it. Is it possible to digitize?
Yeah.
Is that something that's?
So we do ad hoc digitization. So if people are, they can't make it in to see us, they would just do a reproduction request. And there's typically some fees involved there, with scanning and delivery. But yeah, I mean, if we can accommodate a request, we will scan things and send them off to the patron. I know before I started here, our Water Resources Archive, which is also on campus, part of Special Collections, they would get tons of requests from typically law firms who are dealing with water issues that would just request hundreds of
Aaron Brockovich.
Yeah, just request hundreds of administrative reports that they want scanned. And, sometimes we could accommodate that. Other times the request, we just don't have the staffing, right? So we could say, hey, pick, the top 10, we'll get you those. But if you want to see the rest, you really have to come in. But yeah, that is something we offer. And most archives do as well. So if you find something at, NYU that you want to see, reach out to them and say, hey, can you provide me with some copies of this so I don't have to go there?
You do have to be realistic about how much you're asking for.
Yeah.
But yeah, we do the exact same thing.
And if it's a fee, I just want to add to that quickly, because this is really important for everybody. If there's a fee attached to it, you can also talk to your department, talk to your university, talk to the Office of Student Research, and you can find ways to cover these things so that you can get a lot of things. Sorry.
This is more like a very specific question of that water archives. Is that just specific to the IE?
With the content?
Yeah.
No, so it's mainly focused on the Santa Ana watershed and kind of the Mojave, Salton Sea, Colorado River areas of Southern California, but it extends nationally, right? So there are portions of it that deal with the Sacramento Bay Delta, things up north, and then also water issues across the country, but the focus is kind of the Inland Empire.
My main focus, probably Southeast LA.
There might be some things, there's also the Metropolitan Water District, who's the big, water agency out in LA. They maintain their own archive. So they have records and historical records and archives out there. And I think they do have public access to those. So I would probably start there because we might not have a lot in that area, in the LA area.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I've been thinking of looking into water rights internationally because the Colorado River reaches all the way down into Mexico. There's been a lot of fighting over the years on how much Colorado River goes to the States and how much Colorado River goes to Mexico and their agriculture. Do you guys have a lot of material on that or?
I don't know. We might have some. I mean, our collections definitely cover the Colorado River, but most of it's focused kind of on the Inland Empire region of where it comes through. But yeah, potentially it could. And we do have, she just started within the last year, our Water Resources Archivist. So if you have any questions on that, you can just reach out to us. She can kind of look in to see what we have and then get back to you and let you know.
And the Colorado River doesn't reach Mexico anymore.
Not anymore.
It ends at the Salton Sea.
It's way before that. Fortunately.
Yeah, because we fucked it up. I live in the Coachella Valley. I know the Salton Sea.
Yeah.
Required to send water to that.
They made a whole plant in Yuma, Arizona for it and then just didn't use it.
This is, I want to, because I feel a little responsible for shifting it toward asking archivists from a researcher's perspective. But also thinking about other types of sort of adjacent work. And of course, the first thing that comes to mind is libraries, but also the instruction aspect of it and teaching. But are there other things that you feel as you were going through the preparation work, as you were going through, whether it was the doctoral or the master's level of education that you were thinking, this is preparing me for this set of possible employment avenues, or did you become sort of laser focused on archival work?
Nathan, do you want to go first?
Sure. So when I went to get my PhD, I was already employed. And the only reason I thought when I finished my MA, I was never going to be in a classroom again because I was like as close to academic burnout as I ever want to have been. And then about 6 years later, one of my faculty advisors at UCR said, "Hey, we have this new program. We're calling it a major field in public history." And so he basically it's like the Godfather. He made me an offer I couldn't refuse, and so I went back but I did that while I was working full time. And here's another bit of advice that I would share actually is when you're doing projects, if you're thinking towards a thesis or a dissertation or something like that, when you do papers for classes, if there is any flexibility, gear them towards whatever you think your thesis or dissertation topic's going to be. I did that when I went back. I had to take a couple of different classes, and I was able to gear the research for those classes and the papers that I wrote for them towards what I wanted my dissertation topic to be. And so by the time I finished my coursework, I already had 4 chapters written. Just because I was trying to think ahead about what could I do. So yeah, I guess I'm probably not a good example of of going back and then finding career stuff, because I still have the same desk that I've had since 1999, although a slightly different position, but.
Yeah, and by the time I went back to library school, I was 100% focused on archives. 'Cause my bachelor's degree is in psychology, right? It has nothing to do with where I landed. I think most archivists, yeah, we're kind of just all over the map with how we land in the field.
It's versatile.
Yeah.
Psychology's versatile.
Psychology, it definitely is. And you know, for the library degree, you can come in with any bachelor's. It doesn't matter what your bachelor's degree is in, you can get a master's in library science. So I think, yeah, a lot of us kind of fall into the field, and it was when I'd gotten a paraprofessional position at UCR in their special collections department. That was really my first introduction to archives, and I really liked it. So then I purposely went back for the MLIS with the archives track concentration, knowing that I was only going to be an archivist. I wasn't planning on being a librarian, and they're very similar in nature, but I knew I wanted to stay in special collections and archives.
And the MLIS, is that a 1 or 2 year program?
2-year program.
Generally, it's a 2-year program.
Yeah.
And can you give us a quick note on some local institutions that offer the MLIS?
Yeah, so in California, you've got 2 options. You have UCLA, which is still an in-person program, and then you have San Jose State, which is completely online. So those are the 2 in California, but now almost all the major library schools like Illinois and across the country, they're all online now.
Oh,
So
wow.
you pretty much can live here and go anywhere. Yeah.
So the process of getting an MLIS, what is the process actually like as far as like the academics of getting a master's degree? Like, are we talking a big, long thesis being funded by the school and everything, or?
So at San Jose State's where I went, and it was kind of hybrid. So I would have in-person classes here at Fullerton, and then do online, but now it's completely online, which is cool. They offered us the opportunity to do a thesis, or you could do what they call an e-portfolio. And they still offer the e-portfolio. Most students do it now. And there's like 14 like learning objectives of things that you want to support. So you've got to kind of write 14 individual papers saying, okay, here's kind of the topic, and here's all the work I've done to support that topic to show that you're able to complete that work. So it's a semester-long class to do your e-portfolio, and that's the option most students take.
That sounds painful.
It's painful, but when you're doing a thesis, you have to come up with your whole research topic. This kind of takes that out of it to where you just, it's based on all of your past work in the program. So essentially, kind of like what Nathan mentioned, like in the program, you're doing these papers, and those papers will support this e-portfolio at the end. So it's a lot of compiling.
So is this like geared towards people who have already been working in archives and want to go back to school afterwards? Cause I'm just a stupid little undergrad. I haven't done real academic work.
No, it's not geared towards people who are in the field who want to get the degrees. I mean, I think it's open really to anyone. I mean, I had people in my classes never worked in a library before, but they're like, I want a master's in library and information science. And then we've had people like me who had been working in a library at, paraprofessional capacity who wanted to advance in the field, right? So it's pretty much catered to whoever's interested, really.
By the time you get done with your undergrad, you'll do some research work, so it's not something that you'll
You're making a lot of assumptions here about whether I'll finish undergrad, and I don't like.
So the MLIS, are you declaring within that master's program of whether you're interested in working in a library, working in a special collection, working in an archive, or is it, are the tracks similar to those different?
There are tracks. So there's a couple different tracks if you're interested kind of in the public library route or the academic library route or the archives route. So, but there's also kind of the general classes that everyone kind of takes. And then for me, you know, the extra classes I had, I focused in on the archives classes that were offered because I knew that's kind of where I wanted to land. But if I hadn't been able to find a job in archives, I could have still been hired at a public library, for example, because the degree would still support that. So I just lucked out to where I really wanted to do archives and I was able to stay in the field. But I've known people who were on the archives track, didn't get a job in the archives, wound up working in public libraries, and that's where they continue to this day, because it's just kind of where their experience had and they were just okay with it. Yeah.
A new topic for for next year's careers for history majors is libraries, because the archives is such a specific experience that we've been learning from this session, and Nathan joined us last year to talk about this. So I'm interested to also hear from some local public librarians, university librarians, and to be really, really clear on the distinction between these different paths and how they overlap as well.
Yeah, I mean, we have a few librarians who have bachelor's and master's degrees in history. So history was their background and they wound up working in libraries as librarians. So I mean, that's definitely also a route, you know, for history majors.
Yeah, Brent joined us
Yeah,
in the
Brent.
fall. Brent Singleton joined us in the fall. I think, I mean, one thing I hope you all get from this, in addition to all of this really, really crystal clear advice about career paths going towards the archives, is also the contact with Nathan and Eric. In the fall, we had a program with Brent Singleton, and he talked about the kind of sessions that you can do where you can, as a researcher, and Nathan also noted this, when you don't know what you don't know, and you talk to somebody like Nathan, you talk to somebody like Eric, you talk to somebody like Brent, and they say, well, here's what we've got. And then, you know, you start to see what's possible and to understand where your work can start to get specific and put some roots down. This has been really terrific. I want to move toward wrapping up because I'm so grateful for your time. And I know I'm going to be inviting you all back here again next year. So thank you so much, Nathan. Thank you, Eric, for joining us today.
Thanks.
Really great. And Nathan, I sent you a note about a small thank you of a book from one of my colleagues. I'll follow up with you about that again, and I'll put it in the email.
Sounds good. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, good luck, everyone, and feel free to share my contact info. If anyone else has specific questions or they're interested in our summer internship or whatever, we're very accessible.
Thank you so much.